Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Gretchen, and today I am here to officially kick off my first review for the Women's Prize for Nonfiction for 2025. Now, I filmed a version of this video the week that the Longlist was announced. I was immediately able to get my hands on the book I'll be reviewing today, The Story of a Heart, and it was a really fast read and I read it right away, and that weekend I filmed a video. But when I went to edit it, for some reason, for the first 35 to 45 seconds, I was just green squiggly lines. So I decided that I would just scrap that and then start over. But I did find that I was able to save the actual review part of that video. So I will kick over to that in just a minute. But I did want to give you a little bit of an intro instead of just going straight into it, but also to tell you kind of a little bit about what to expect for the Women's Prize for Nonfiction specifically this year. So looking at the long list, there are so many books that are very interesting to me and I would love an opportunity to read. However, I'm not going to pressure myself to get all of the long list read this year like I did for last year's prize. And I also am not really going to stress out too much about when I get to the books that I actually do want to read. So I will do reviews for them, obviously, but they might not be until after the shortlist is announced. They might not even be until after the winner is announced, but I will give you those reviews as I finish them. Several of the books I have found have been a little hard for me to get my hands on, and I'm also on extremely long wait lists at my library for some of them, so it's not going to be a while until I even get an opportunity to read some of them. So I'm really not keen right now on spending a lot of money on books, especially for nonfiction, when we now have the Women's Prize for Fiction long list out and the International Booker Prize long list as well, and those are often books that are even harder to come by for me, especially the International Booker. So if I do need to purchase any books, it will likely be from that long list. So yeah, I really enjoy the Nonfiction Prize. It's just that it's another prize in the midst of a ton of other book prizes as well, and I'm primarily a fiction reader, so the fiction prizes are always going to take priority over nonfiction for me. But there are a few books I've already been able to read, including this one that I'm about to give a review for, so there will still be content related to the Nonfiction Prize. And who knows, I might get copies of those books sooner, so there might be more coming your way, but we're just gonna have to play it by ear, and yeah, we'll see what happens. But until then, here is the first review for the first book that I read from this year's prize. So the first book that I finished from this long list is called The Story of a Heart, and this is by Dr. Rachel Clarke. And fundamentally what this book is about is you have an organ donor and you have a recipient. So you have Kira, she was 9 years old, she was in a terrible car accident, and then you have Max, who was also 9 years old, and he unexpectedly came down with an illness, and he very soon, very quickly became in need of a heart transplant. So the story follows Kira through her accident, through her the attempts of medical personnel trying to save her life, ultimately getting to the point of realizing that she couldn't be saved, and then the family making the decision on her behalf, knowing that she would have wanted her organs to be donated. And then you have the other story of Max, who was a relatively healthy child and then was suddenly struck with this illness, and how his parents dealt with that, and his duration of his stays throughout his hospital, trying to get his heart healthy and to the point where he could be a normal kid again, and then getting to that point where he needed a transplant to save his life. So you have the family story, you have the story of the children. But the story goes so much more beyond that. I could have read just a story about the dynamics of those two families coming together and just the story about the transplant and the donation. However, this book also talked about the power of things like this happening, where people are being advocates and trying to get laws changed around organ donation or other medical type of laws. It was not something I was expecting, and if I had read the subtitle of the story, of the book, I would have known that, but it was a pleasant surprise going into this story thinking I was just going to get this heartfelt, poignant story, and I really got a lot of good information out of it. Specifically, they talked about how there were laws in place in the UK where, as it is in the States, so you actually have to opt in to be an organ donor. And through this tragedy for Kira's family and, the blessing that Max's family got, they were able to come together and fight for legislation to be changed in order for, instead of it being an opt-in, you actually had to opt out to widen that net, hopefully, to get more people on the organ donation list to help all of those that were in need. And they were able to get that done, and it has really improved the lives of so many people because they are now able to benefit from those organs that otherwise would not have been there if people were not opting in. So that was a really interesting storyline to follow throughout this book. The other thing that I just found fascinating was it gave insight to how pediatric units are run, all of the efforts made to ensure that the children are not just getting medical care, but that their mental health is taken into consideration, and to make sure that their cognitive and their emotional growth and health is still taken into consideration. It gives a long history of how in the past, when children were in hospital, they were often isolated from their parents. They were under the strict care of doctors and nurses, and the parents weren't allowed to visit or be around them. But, coming to the conclusion finally that children are going to thrive more and be healthier if they're getting the love and attention from their parents and their siblings and their family. So that was a really interesting part of this book as well. It also covered a lot of history related to transplant surgery in general, the workflows and the processes in determining who qualifies for donation, who is going to get the organs, and ultimately, once it's determined that you have a match between a donor and a recipient, that whole process of how that organ gets from the one patient to the recipient. And that was all fascinating. I'm a nurse by background, and anything related to medicine or any of that, it was just really interesting to have that insight to see how all of that goes down and the processes behind that. I was absolutely invested in this book from the word go. It's such an interesting story, and the way that Clarke presented it, it was just so captivating. She just kept me interested the entire time. This was a perfect balance of the compelling story of the family and the act of generosity that was happening, but it also balanced it perfectly with that educational side too. So I was learning all throughout the duration of this book, and I especially loved that the author took the time to talk about the love and the care that was taken to honor the donor, Kira, and Max, the recipient, as well as their families. Like, I'm assuming that she was working directly with them. I didn't read any of the background of how the book was written or anything to that, but you can tell that there was so much care that went into making sure that this story was told in a very respectable way. I'll also say another thing I really appreciated about this book was, due to the subject matter, I knew going into this that there would be tears shed. You're not going to read a book about a 9-year-old organ donor and a 9-year-old child that needs a heart without shedding a couple tears. But what I appreciated was the way that Clarke told the story. It was touching and it was heartwarming throughout, but she saved all of the gut punches for me, at least until the end, because I honestly don't think that I could have made it through a book like this with it being so emotional and it being so sad throughout the duration of it. I'm glad that she really waited to give me that gut punch to the end, because I honestly don't think I could have physically read the book if I was stopping to cry, you know, every few pages. And what I will say, if I did have one criticism of the book, I do wish that a little more time was spent on the process of getting the law changed. It was there, but the author didn't go into great detail with it. And I think that the book was short enough that I feel like she could have spent a little bit more time going over that and kind of that process, so that for anybody else that would be interested in other countries of maybe trying to pursue something like that, that we had a little more detail of how that happened. I don't know if that's maybe present in a different book. I'm not sure, but I was fascinated by the idea of that, and I would actually like to look into that more. So I was hoping to get a little more of that out of the book, but still, even though I would have liked more in there, I think the author gave enough to get her point across. So I would say if you are interested in any of the things that I talked about, I would absolutely recommend this. It's not an easy read by any means. Tears were definitely shed, but it's a beautiful, hopeful story. And I think that also it's a story that could likely bring comfort to parents that are in similar situations or have been on the receiving end of either, whether their child had been an organ donor or their child had been a recipient. I think that there would be some level of comfort that may be able to be obtained from a book like this, because I think it was done with a great amount of care and respect. So yeah, I really enjoyed my time with this book. We're already off to a great start as far as the nonfiction prize goes. I'm also actively finishing or wrapping up one now that I also loved. So we are really off to a great start so far with this prize, and I'm really looking forward to reading more of these titles. And until we read again, bye.